All right. Balancing caregiving in everyday life, sponsored by Ellie Cares. What is Ellie Cares? So this is an app that you can find on your phone. Depends, if you have an iPhone, you can obviously go to the App Store. If you have an Android, you got to go to the Google Play Store and you can download the Ellie app. So this is an app that works for both people living with dementia and their caregivers. For context, people come to me all the time to ask me to review their technology, their apps, their various products. And generally, I say no, because a lot of the time, I don't feel like the products actually help anybody living with dementia, especially when it comes to these apps, because a lot of times the apps are really just built for people who, are incredibly early stages or really probably don't have dementia at all, because they don't help anybody with anything. They're not really dealing with a specific problem. A lot of times the apps that I see seek to remind a person with dementia of things, and that's it. But the problem is a lot of times it's not even an app. A lot of times it's like a fully different device that they have to use. For example, one time a guy sent me, wasn't an iPad, but it was a sort of like tablet. This is a couple of years ago to look at. And the tablet was built to help people living with dementia, but they needed a whole other tablet to do anything with. So I just thought, this doesn't make any sense. But Ellie Cares, as soon as I got in touch with Angela and her team at Ellie Cares, I realized this was a very different product than anything else that I'd previously seen. So there are features on here for people living with dementia and for caregivers, which I really appreciate. For people living with dementia, there are reminders for tasks, appointments, medications. You can receive notifications when your tasks, appointments, or meds are due. And I have tested this and it 100% works. I've debated like setting it up for other types of reminders, not medicines, but like other things that I have to do. I love this feature, safe zones. So you can actually set up areas that the person living with dementia visits often, such as maybe a certain circumference around their house, a certain radius. And they'll receive notifications with support and directions if they move outside of those areas. And then you as the caregiver can get those alerts as well. You can use it independently if you're living with an earlier stage of cognitive impairment or with a family member. So Ellie Cares helps you manage your day-to-day. You can connect with family for what they call unobtrusive oversight, right? So it's not a camera where they're watching the person all the time. That's not what this is about, but it's about providing that extra help and safety in a kind manner. So for example, if the person living with dementia forgot to take their medication, like they didn't log it on the app, when the little window pops up, that would notify perhaps, somebody like his daughter or something like that. It also can help the person find their way home, which is so cool. So it automatically pulls up directions if they're lost. And you can ask Ellie anything. So they have assistants, they have AI built in. And by the way, they've added a feature or are adding a feature for caregivers that can allow them to chat and find answers and then connect, possibly even with Dementia by Day, for one-to-one help. So that's what that looks like. So it'll pop up, is everything okay? And the person living with dementia is able to easily, press a button and be connected with help if they need it. For family members, there are real-time alerts. Stay informed if your loved one misses a reminder or leaves a safe zone. You can know where they are. Also really appreciate this, the battery level status. So you have visibility of your loved one's battery level to support them better if and when needed. And of course, peace of mind. It's this unobtrusive oversight. So they're always adding new features. And I think this is so key. And again, there are just not that many apps out there that I've seen that work with people living with dementia that I actually have taken the time to work with, because generally speaking, they're missing the ball, and Ellie is not doing that. When technology works, here are some of my favorite pieces of technology. At least two of these are not really designed for people living with dementia, but are 100% excellent things to use in your caregiving journey. So up here in the top left, we've got Tile, Tile. Comes in many different shapes and sizes. There are options to put them on your keys. You could put them in your wallet. You can stick them to stuff. They are little devices that help you find things. So I have a couple of these, actually. I put one in my son's stroller because sometimes we'll park that outside and, go inside of a restaurant or something. I have one in my wallet. I had one on my keys. I have these little tiles, and if you lose the item, you can actually ring it from your phone, which is really cool. So if it's within a certain radius, you'll hear it go off. And then if it's outside of that radius, it'll show you where it is on a map. In the bottom left, we have Wise, this camera, WYZE. There are a million different camera options, but I highly recommend, especially if your loved one lives at home. Ideally, they're not there alone, but regardless, you are there, somebody's there with them. And in lieu of somebody being, there all the time in the same room with them, having potentially a camera. Now, I want to emphasize, we do not ever want to rely on technology to manage a person living with dementia, right? We never want to rely on that technology to say like, okay, this is going to be the sole thing that helps me work with this person living with dementia. We don't want to set up a camera in somebody's house and say, okay, solved it, right? Because I've been to people's houses before where they have a piece of technology and the family sometimes has decided like, oh, this is enough, to provide care. And it's absolutely not. Because if something goes wrong, if you're not there to manage it, you're not gonna be able to get there quick enough, right?
That's why
This
I'm going
one
to come
up
to
in the top right, care and health tracking. Let me
give me a list of an
here. Simple care and health tracking for your loved one. This is the Tally app, Talli. I really like this option. So I have this for my baby son. We use it to keep track of, wet diapers, sleep, eating, the whole 9 yards. This is available as well, customized to fit for caring for adults as well. So you can track different things on the app, and you can track using this Tally app, which is this actual thing that lives outside of your phone that you can press buttons on, and it will immediately translate to the app. So we have found it very helpful for our baby, but it's great really for caring for anybody, because the reality of the situation is if you're trying to remember some of this stuff for like a physician appointment, for example, you're not going to remember, maybe when they took their last medication, things like that. Over here in the pets, we see the Joy for All companion pets. I really love the memorable pets as an option. Those are a great option. And also these are robotic, so you don't need to get a robotic pet. But if that is something you're interested in, the Joy for All companion pets are a great option as far as like technology goes. I want to emphasize that you don't need any of these things, and you don't need to get like a robotic pet, because having a pet that just sits there and doesn't do anything, that's totally fine as well. It doesn't have to be like a robot, right? Caregiving is an imperfect science. Sorry, real quick. Caregiving is an imperfect science. Taking care of anybody, just you can't you can't decide like, okay, this is exactly how things are going to go every single day. We don't have anything to back that up. I mean, I talk about frequently, and somebody just joined, if you download my e-kit about taking care of somebody at home, you will see in there, I tell a story about taking my son to daycare, right? It was really, really hard for me to do at first. It's just a sitter. We drop him off with this woman, and she has 1 or 2 kids that she takes care of. That was super hard for me, even doing that. And so in some ways, I feel like I need to take my own advice when I talk about caregiving and not being the sole caregiver. But planning his day, figuring out, what how he's sleeping, how he's eating, all these things. I frequently beat myself up about trying to get a perfect science down for these things. And the reality is that it's just not going to happen. And caring for somebody living with dementia, an adult who's declining, is going to be even tougher. In fact, there's a chapter in 2 of my books called Caregiving is an Imperfect Science. And the reason for that is because I often found as a dementia care director that when families would transition a loved one into our care, they would have very, very high expectations as to what was necessary, and what would happen with their loved one. And frequently it seemed as though people felt like, oh, my loved one's in memory care, their memory is going to get better. And of course, that isn't what happened. So caregiving is this imperfect science. And I found myself telling that to families when they were moving loved ones in, because if I could sense that their expectations were really high, I really wanted to address right off the bat, there's no perfect day in dementia care. Even when I'm teaching program directors, people running programming in dementia care, I always tell them, look, I want you to plan the best calendar you possibly can. The reality of the situation, the day is never going to go perfectly. Someone's going to fall. They're going to go out to the hospital. Maybe some kids are going to come in to visit their grandparents, and their great grandparents, it's going to throw everything off. It's going to rain. It's going to snow. The residents are going to be agitated about the weather. Any litany of reasons that things are not going to go perfectly. And so planning the calendar the best that you can, but the reality is caregiving is far more of an art than it is a science. Why is caregiving so hard? Well, I think for one, we covered one of those. It's really difficult to learn how to take care of someone while actively taking care of them, right? Both these things require a lot of energy. Typically, when people find Dementia by Day, my consulting firm, we work primarily with senior living companies, but I do have a ton of resources for caregivers. And typically when caregivers find my resources, it's not because they just randomly stumbled on it. It's because they were searching for things about dementia to learn about caring for somebody living with dementia, and they fell into it, right? So typically, besides people who work in dementia care, most people don't know a whole lot about dementia until they actually have to deal with it. And why would they, right? There is so much information out there. What should you listen to, read, try? I see, unfortunately, a good deal of false information about dementia, especially when it comes to communication, which we will touch on a little bit here. But for example, I saw people send me these videos, but I had a friend send me a video the other week and I could barely watch it. So this guy has, over 1 million followers on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is. And he makes these videos about taking care of his dad. And while he means well, he's doing the wrong thing frequently. So his dad is asking about someone who passed away. And the guy's going, Dad, don't you remember? He died. And he's saying it in a gentle way. But that's the wrong way to do this. And I'll explain why. So he's doing the wrong thing And so many people in the comments are like, oh, this is so great. You know, you take such great care of your dad. And it's like, oh no, people are seeing this and thinking, this is the way I should be going about this. And it's not. People living with dementia are also all on different journeys, and their needs change depending on their disease progression. And different diseases progress at different rates. There are over 100 different causes of dementia. So there's not one staging tool that really works either. So sometimes people will ask me, oh, well, how many stages of dementia are there? Or this is what's happening with my loved one. What stage are they in? And the answer is, I don't know, because there are a bunch of different staging tools. I don't like to use any of them. I talk about typically people being an early moderate, a late moderate, or an advanced stage of dementia, because I don't like labeling people with a number. And most of the staging tools that you'll find are numerical. So people living with dementia are all on different journeys, and it may be that someone moves between these numerical stages in a way that is hard to follow, right? So I really don't want to give people the feeling that like, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen to my loved one, because we just don't have that information. As talking about diagnosing is really hard. It does help to know what kind of dementia your loved one has, but getting that diagnosis is not always possible. I do a lot of in-person events these days for family caregivers, for my clients' buildings that I go to. And people frequently ask about getting that diagnosis. They say, should I take my loved one to the doctor to get a diagnosis? And my answer is maybe. And the reason I say maybe is because perhaps getting them to that appointment, finding a physician who's going to do that diagnosis, and then getting that person there may be so difficult that it's going to add a level of difficulty to your life as a caregiver that is just not worth it, right? So it may be that you have a very good sense of where that person is in their disease process, and that's perfect. You don't necessarily need to get a diagnosis of what type of dementia it is. If it's going to be a hardship for you and your family to do so, I would say skip it. And of course, as everybody knows, dementia is often harder on the caregiver than on the person living with dementia. When the person is in an earlier stage of the disease, of their disease process, and they might be aware that they're declining, that is very hard. But past that early stage, a lot of people living with dementia don't even know they have dementia. So this is what I often hear this said, this is a family disease. And the reason it's a family disease is because the family is dealing with this in a way, unlike any other disease or group of diseases, that the person who has the disease is not dealing with that. Think about it. If your loved one has cancer, they're probably talking about it. You're talking about it. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's talking about beating cancer. Everybody's talking about that battle. When someone's living with dementia, they might not know they have dementia. And frankly, we don't want to keep telling them that they have dementia. We don't want to do that. So dementia is often harder on that person, on that caregiver than the person living with dementia in many ways. Plus, most importantly, learning to communicate with someone living with dementia is sort of like learning a new language. I would know. I've been teaching myself German on Duolingo, the language learning app, for the last almost 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. That's a pretty long time. And can I go to Germany and order food? Yes, I have. Did I get the wrong type of bread? Yes. The point is, learning a language is hard. And Many families find that communicating with someone living with dementia, they think, oh, well, we all speak the same language. This isn't going to be any different than it was before. And the reality is that their reality has often shifted. The person living with dementia, as the disease progresses, their reality, what is true for them, changes. And so for many families, it's incredibly challenging to learn how to embrace their new reality, right? And so learning to communicate with someone is a whole other challenge that many people weren't even prepared to deal with. And like I mentioned, the things that make dementia caregiving hard, this is probably one of the toughest ones. I stumbled really into embracing the reality. I made up this phrase, I created it years ago because I found that everything I've been learning about dementia, which was just to redirect somebody or distract them, didn't quite solve the problem. So embracing somebody's reality means that we're going to do what's true for them wherever it is. If they if they're scared and they think someone's breaking in the house, we're going to lock the windows, right? We're going to make a fake phone call to the police. We're not going to say, no, nobody's breaking in. When they say, where's my mom? And their mother passed years ago, we're not going to say, don't you remember she died? We're going to say, where do you think she is? Whatever they say is the correct answer. All we're doing is finding out where their reality is and then choosing to go there. And for a lot of people, this is really hard. And it's frequently, even if the caregiver gets it, even if the main person understands this, teaching it to families, other family members, friends who come to visit, sometimes it doesn't work. This happened in my own family 15 years ago. I was helping take care of my great aunt who was living with dementia, and she was what I like to call pleasantly confused. She was very pleasant. She was definitely confused, but there was no, she was just having, she just had a good time all the time. I remember one time I went to her house and she said, hey, guess who was here today? I said, I don't know who. And she said, President Obama. And I said, oh, great. And she said, oh, yeah, he was here. We had tea. We had a nice time. He wanted to take home one of my pictures. And I said, oh, okay. Well, I guess he didn't let him take a picture. She said, oh, no, but he's very nice. He has very nice hands. My uncle, though, one of her sons, couldn't wrap his head around this. Probably still can't. Could not embrace her reality to save his life. Constantly argued with his mom. And honestly, degraded their relationship over time because he kept starting fights with her. And I kept telling him, Uncle Rick, you really have to stop arguing with her. You're destroying your relationship. Just, I don't know, live in her world. He couldn't understand it. And frequently I meet families where there's a brother or a sister or a cousin who just doesn't get it, and they make it hard on everybody. What can make caregiving even harder? Your loved one living with dementia lives with you. Frequently, I have caregivers who, find our resources and they'll say, my loved one lives with me. We're debating moving them into, a care community setting. But we're afraid, or whatever the reason is. And the person lives with them. Taking care of somebody living with dementia 24/7 is not the same as taking care of a healthy child. It's just not the same. You're taking care of an adult who's declining, who's losing some of the gains they've made in life. That's a very different situation than caring for a baby, raising a small child, right? Who is growing and learning and able to do new things. You're the sole caregiver. Very often, there is one main caregiver. And I've heard the argument said like, oh, well, that's why you need to have like multiple kids. So one of them, or all of them will take care of you when you're old. I've seen situations where somebody has 5 kids, none of them get along, 5 adult children, none of them get along. And then they can't even communicate with one another, let alone take care of mom or dad. So having a bunch of kids is no guarantee that one of them's actually going to be able to be a good caregiver. But frequently, even if you had 10 kids, there's one who becomes the main caregiver, and the rest of them aren't that involved. I see this all of the time. And typically, the people who are on these types of calls, webinars, support groups, whatever we're doing, you are frequently the sole caregiver. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, I have a sibling who helps out a little bit, or, my neighbor stops over, or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're the one making the decisions for the person living with dementia. And so that's really what I mean when I talk about being the sole caregiver. Even if your loved one living with dementia lives in a care community, you can still be the main caregiver, because even if you're not taking care of that person physically 24/7, we both know you are still incredibly involved in their day-to-day life. You're getting the phone calls from the care community, you're being asked the questions, you're managing everything, right? You're still the main caregiver. This is a big one. I mentioned family a bunch, right? If the rest of the family doesn't agree on the care plan, man, it makes things hard. If you have decided it's time to transition dad into dementia care, but your brother has been digging his heels in, it's gonna be a tough time, right? Because even if he's not the financial power of attorney, even if he's not the medical power of attorney, just the fact that he's in your ear about it is going to make you feel guilty, and it's going to make this caregiving journey even tougher than it already is. A lack of dementia care education or resources. More and more, I think this is less and less of a problem because of the plethora of things on the internet. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are also a litany of not so great resources. So be sure you're doing your homework when you're reading about anything about dementia or anything on the web. Remember that anybody with a camera, any fool with a camera, any fool with an iPhone can make a decent video, can make some content and post it online. It doesn't mean it's accurate. It doesn't mean they have the credibility there. It doesn't mean they have any background in this stuff at all. So be sure that whoever you're getting your information from has the educational background and the experience necessary to be able to really give you good information. Denial of current stage. We never want to try to convince the person living with dementia that they have dementia, or something like, Mom, don't you remember you have dementia? Or the doctor says you're in a moderate stage of dementia. We don't want to do any of that. That said, it is really tough when the person living with dementia is insisting to you that they don't need any help, they don't have anything wrong with them, and they are perfectly capable to make decisions for themselves when you know they're not. That is really, really tough. I've also seen it happen that a doctor or another person that the family is speaking with is sort of in denial about the person's condition. I once had a woman raise her hand at a speaking event I was doing, and she said, we have a family physician that we go to, we've been going to for years, but I am losing my mind. She said, I feel crazy because I know something's going on with my mom, and he makes me feel like I'm nuts. He makes me feel like nothing's wrong with her. He keeps telling me she's fine. And I know that's not true. So she didn't really have a question so much as a statement, but I reassured her that she's correct. She knows her mom better than any doctor is ever going to. And unfortunately, if a person living with dementia is good at, coming to an appointment and talking about the weather or something basic, there's a good chance that they're going to sort of fool the physician who's making the diagnosis. Now, if they were going to somewhere like in Pittsburgh, we have the Benham Center for Geriatrics, we have UPMC, Alzheimer's, and it's called the Alzheimer's Research Center. If you're at a place like that, you're going to a major center, you're going to get a solid diagnosis. You're going to get an accurate picture of what's going on. But if you're just going to, a cardiologist or somebody who really doesn't specialize in brain-related diseases, you may just end up with nothing, or you may end up with a blanket diagnosis that just is dementia, right? That doesn't actually tell us what type of dementia it is. It doesn't really give us any information, but that's probably what you would end up with. And so it can be really challenging if that person is not a specialist or a neurologist or a geriatrician or what have you. For them to make an accurate diagnosis, you may not get that information, and that can be really frustrating for caregivers. Not making time for yourself. It can be and can feel really impossible to make time for yourself while caregiving, right? It can feel overwhelming, and it can feel like there's no way that you're going to be able to, actually find the space and time to give yourself some space, give yourself the ability to take time away from the person living with dementia and take care of yourself. There's something in the chat, so I just want to see what that is. Yeah, Teresa says, we don't even communicate with each other. I'm assuming you mean your siblings. Yeah, it's frequent, unfortunately, that happens. Caregiver guilt can stop care partners from making the best choices for themselves and the person living with dementia. So much so that I have a whole chapter on this in 2 or maybe even all 3 of my books. Caregiver guilt was something I ran into frequently while working as a dementia care director. And it was so interesting to me because some of these families were amazing. They made all the best decisions for their loved ones, and still they felt terrible. They felt guilty. They felt like they were doing something wrong. I remember this one woman in particular, Lisa. Her name was Lisa, and she had transitioned her mom into our community after 2 or 3 years of taking care of her 24/7. And her mom was super sweet, but she was a handful. She was very mobile and would repeat things constantly. So she would just say the same word again and again and again all day, every day. And the word that she was stuck on was her daughter's name. So she would say Lisa, 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 like all day. I have no idea how this woman managed to take care of her mom at home all day, every day. This woman's husband, Lisa's husband, reportedly had earphones things in his ears so he could work from home without distraction, because it would drive him bonkers. And to be honest, I can't blame him. So Lisa finally moved her mom into our community, and I know she felt so guilty about it. She was crying during the move-in. She's like, I can't believe I'm actually doing this. Some people from my family are telling me not to do it. And I said, Lisa, you are making the best decision you can for your mom, and I promise you we're going to take great care of her. She came to visit her mom frequently, and Lisa's mom did great with us. She did really, really well with us, and everybody really enjoyed spending time with her. And I remember one time Lisa came in tears, and she said, my cousins are in from out of town, and my cousin is just making me feel so bad. I think maybe I should take mom home. And I said, Lisa, how often does your cousin see your mom? And she said, I don't know, maybe once a year. And I was like, right. So when he wants to come and pick her up and take her to his house and take care of her 24/7, he can go ahead and do that. And she said, well, he would never do that. And I said, exactly, exactly. He has no leg to stand on. He has no idea what this journey is like and how hard it's been for everybody. He can't come in with this nonsense. But they will. If your loved one lives at home with you, please remember that dementia is a beg for forgiveness instead of asking for permission group of diseases. What do I mean by that? If we're waiting for the person living with dementia to give us permission to take the car keys, we're going to be waiting forever. If we're hoping the person living with dementia will admit that they need help, we're going to be waiting forever. If we're waiting for them to tell us it's okay to move them to dementia care, or even to allow a home caregiver into their home, we're going to be probably waiting forever. Dementia is a beg for forgiveness instead of asking for a permission group of diseases. We can't wait for the person living with dementia to decide that they need help, because by then it's already too late. It's not safe anymore. Someone living with a cognitive impairment doesn't have the ability to decide when something is safe. Frequently, I've seen people's homes in caregiving situations where they have like signs up on doors like, Dad, don't go down the basement stairs, or like, Mom, make sure you turn off the oven. The reality of the situation is this person may not even remember to read the sign, and they're probably not going to remember to do what it says, or they might just straight up ignore it. So, waiting to make sure this person like understands safety stuff, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So consider what you need every day, not just what they need. Building your entire life around their schedule gets really, really tough. So looking at it from what else do you need to feel like a sane and functional person? And I mentioned earlier, even I say this to caregivers all the time, but then having a baby myself and deciding to take him to a sitter during the day for a little bit, even to see if I could get some work done, was really hard the first few times I had to do it. And still to this day can be difficult. And he's been home with me all day. He was home with me all day yesterday. And unless I have someone come over to help me, or my husband is, downstairs and he's not working either. I mean, if you've raised kids, it's really hard to get anything done. Unless he's napping, I can't get a lot of work done. And I run a business. And still, I beat myself up. So I can't even take my own advice. And I know how hard it is to say, okay, you know what? I need to maybe think about myself and my own sanity, because I know when I'm in a better mood and I'm happier and I feel like I've actually got things done, I'm a better mom. I'm a better caregiver than I would have been if I'm fried, if I've got nothing left to give. That's not a good version of me. Instead of asking people for help, schedule it. Literally. Here's what I mean. I was talking to a caregiver a couple months ago, and she told me, friends and family always offer to help, but they say things like, oh yeah, if you ever need help with your mom, just give me a call. But that's, as we know, not super helpful, because inevitably they don't show up. They don't actually jump in to help. And I said, what if you schedule them on a calendar? What if you literally said, oh, Diane, you want to come over, you want to help? Great. Could you come over Tuesday at 10:30 and pick her up to go get some coffee? You can? Okay, awesome. I'm going to put this on our calendar. I'm going to send you a Google Calendar invite. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with when people are saying, hey, I'll help, actually taking them up on it, but making sure they follow through. The reality of the situation is this sort of like, call me if you need me. That's not helpful. And we all know it, right? How do we balance caregiving with everyday life and work? I think the term work-life balance is a little bit of a misnomer, right? All of those things are a part of life. And I think even especially post 2020, the whole work-life balance got even more blurry for a lot of people. Mine was always kind of blurry because I've been working from home since 2016, but I've mostly figured it out. And that said, do I have a lot of, balance? I don't know. My work is very much a part of my life, and it may be yours as well. If your loved one lives in memory care, you don't have to visit for long hours at a time. And frankly, shorter visits are often the most successful. So I've seen it happen that even when a person transitions their loved one into dementia care, they are still there all the time. They're still with that person all the time. And it still is burning them out. The beautiful thing about transitioning someone into a dementia care community is that you can become that your loved one's spouse again, their, daughter, their son, whatever you are to them. You can become that person again because you are not their 24/7 physical caregiver. I am friends with a woman who you can Google her name. Google her. Her name is Mary Daniels, and she lives in Florida. She moved her husband into a dementia care community actually after talking to me back in, I don't know, probably 2016, 2017. And when the pandemic hit, everybody was locked out. You couldn't go visit a loved one, right? So she actually got a job as a dishwasher at his dementia care community so she could see him every day, which is genius. And she was all over the news for it. So she has a really cool story. Her husband has since passed, but I really recommend checking out Mary's stuff. Her name is Mary Daniels. Ignore the out-of-towners. The people, I call them the out-of-towners. They may be living right next door to you, right? Your brother might live right next door to you. He's still an out-of-towner if he's not the primary caregiver. If you're the primary caregiver, he's an out-of-towner. Their ideas of should and shouldn't. Here's what you should be doing for your loved one living with dementia. Here's what you shouldn't be doing. Well, you shouldn't have moved her into memory care. She seems fine. He raised you. You should take care of him at home. I talked to her on the phone for 10 minutes every month, and it doesn't seem like she should be on that dementia medicine. There are going to be plenty of people in your life who have a lot of thoughts for you about how you're caregiving and what you should and shouldn't be doing instead. The reality of the situation is they are not doing the primary caregiving. And if they had been tasked with that, it wouldn't have gone well. I guarantee it. This is the type of person they're not going to go bring that person to live with them. It's just not going to happen. They've got a lot of thoughts. They got a lot of opinions, but ignore them. They're an out-of-towner, even if they live next door. The importance of self-care. I think the term self-care has become kind of overused, but I don't believe in this case it's about glasses of wine and long baths, although those things are great and you should still do them if you want. When it comes to caregiving, it's really about sharing the burden of caregiving and not being the sole caregiver. And people will say to me, well, wait a minute, how do I do that? I'll go over some ideas. When you take care of yourself, you're better able to show up for your loved one as their caregiver. Ask for help, and as I mentioned, schedule it. methods of getting space, getting help. Memory care, transitioning that person into a dementia care community. I've got 2 books. The first one's out of print, but you can still find it, about moving somebody into a dementia care community. It is a guide to doing this, the hows, the whens, the whats, all the things you need to know. So of course I recommend my books to you. They're in every library that I know of. You can get them in Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever books are sold. You can have it ordered. If you have a local bookstore, you can have it ordered there and you can pick it up. Home caregivers. Home caregivers may be professional, like a home care agency. Home Instead Senior Care is probably the largest home caregiving agency in the United States. Or friends, family. Check out the website care.com. On care.com, you can find individual caregivers you can hire to come over, even if it's a few hours a week, just to give yourself a breather. Give yourself time to run an errand, to go to the gym. For me, going to the gym is so important. If I do not exercise, I am not a good version of myself. I definitely have an addiction to exercising, but as far as addictions go, it's probably not real bad. Respite care. Some dementia care communities will offer respite care where you can bring your loved one for a short stay. If you are doing a respite stay, I would not use it so much as a trial run, but use it with the intention to continue having your loved one live there or to move in shortly after the respite has ended. Adult day. There are not enough adult day programs in this country, but adult day programs are really excellent ways to have your loved one taken care of during the day. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It's daycare, but I hate that phrase for this situation, for people living with dementia for the most part. So let's find out what questions you all have. Feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask me, you can. I will have this as a replay, and I'll make sure that everybody gets it. And I also, of course, so I'll make sure that everybody gets that. So let me here. And of course, I also said that I think one of those emails, at least one of those emails, said I was giving out a gift card. So I will give a gift card after this presentation is over. I will send it out to the winner. I'm going to have somebody pick a name out of a hat. But what questions does anybody have? And by the way, if you have no questions, feel free to email me. Joella says, any suggestions for constantly feeling guilty and dealing with anticipatory grief as we lose them more and more each day? Yes. So I have a whole chapter in my book about guilt and dealing with guilt. I really recommend joining a support group, talking to other caregivers who are absolutely going through very similar feelings. Every single caregiver I've ever talked to feels guilty. So talking to other people in this boat and just being able to vent and lament to each other is very powerful. There are a ton of virtual support groups. I have one through a program I have. It's called Patreon, and I'll link it here. And there are also probably local ones. You can probably go to one in person. Anticipatory grief is an interesting one, and I actually have a whole presentation to some degree on this, but there's a great book that deals with this as well. It's called Making Tough Decisions About End-of-Life Care in Dementia. That's what it's called. And it's by Dr. Ann Kenny. And she is really excellent resource. She writes a whole book. She has a whole book about end-of-life care, but she has a bunch of information about anticipatory grief. And I think it's really powerful. I did not send a link for Tile, so that's why you did not get a link for the Tile. Just Google Tile, Tile app, I would look up. but yeah, I did not send out a link, but that's a great thing to look up in terms of like a GPS tracker. Also, your iPhone itself, if you have an iPhone, is essentially a tracking device. If you want it to be, you can turn on Find My iPhone. And if you have like Apple AirTags are another example of tile kind of things. You can put an Apple AirTag on different objects and it will connect to Find My iPhone, and then you can track things that way. But again, what I really like about the LA Cares app is this is something that can help your loved one find their way home if need be, but it can also help you reach them. And LA Cares is always adding new features. So I recommend checking out LA Cares. I will put a link to their website right here, and you can check out more of their stuff. It's called leapp.co. And I just really recommend checking out that site. It is a paid app. I think it's like $4 a month or something, and they have a free trial, so it's really not a big financial strain, I don't think. So worth checking out. Anybody have any other specific questions? I want to thank LA Cares for sponsoring this webinar, and hopefully we will be doing something again like this soon. We'll be sending out this recording, so if you want to share it with friends or family, please do, and then anyone who missed this will be able to watch it. Thank you. Oh, thanks.